Bulldogs. Welcome to another introduction to a Bulldog's Passion by by Mrs. Cotillo and Mrs. Stenard, who just figured out how to use the sound button.
I love the sound buttons.
Sorry, we're children. Anyway, this episode is a very interesting one. It is all about baking, and I think it's really cool that a third grader has this much of an interest in baking.
But it's not just baking, it's the history of baking.
Right.
And which was even more interesting to me. So it when I got to sit in on this on this episode, and it was very like thinking about how I think I even said in the episode, you don't really think about where your food comes from or where it might have come from or how food has evolved over thousands of years. There was one fact that she talked about how they used to cook food. I'm not going to give it, no spoiler alert. So it was just interesting to sit back and think as a third grader, where it started, how it started, what were the first foods, what were the first things that were baked. It was very interesting.
I think about things like that sometimes, like who was sitting around, what cave people were sitting around and thinking,
let me put this in this.
Like, I'm sick of eating leaves and, raw
Berries.
meat. And, well, I guess they must have cooked meat over fire, but like who decided to make an oven, or who figured out how you could leave something out in heat for a long time
and it would turn to bread. And even I always think, who thought for the first time to eat a lobster?
right
Because they're very menacing creatures, and who was the first brave person that ate a lobster?
Right.
And now they're a delicacy, like now it's fancy.
I think about that with artichokes too, because artichokes are really weird to eat and hard to eat. And so who realized that those spiky things on the top, on the leaves, are not to eat, but you can eat the bottom, and it's really good, and the heart, yeah. So baking is an interesting topic, and I think Sophia said that she's been baking since she was 5.
She really talked about how her mom got her into her passion, which I think is great. Her mom spends a lot of time with her baking, and that created this. And I liked when we were talking about the passions in the beginning with all of the kids, how we tried to do the watermelon and the seed. So baking is the watermelon, because you can do so much with baking, and you can see how she turned it into the seed of the history of baking. So she really thought about what she wanted to learn about her passion of baking, which I think was amazing.
Is she going to bring baked goods to the Knowledge Expo? That is my real question. Probably not, right?
I don't know.
Yeah, because food is kind of a no-no.
Food's a no-no. And also the food she talked about, it might be a little hard to make. And they don't sound...
No, that's true.
And the food from ancient times, not so appetizing.
Right. I was at the Liberty Science Center a couple weeks ago, and we saw there was an exhibit about Pompeii, and there was an actual loaf of bread.
Oh, geez,
that was covered in ash. Yeah,
wow.
And I took a picture actually for Sophia, and I showed it to her because I thought it was really cool that it was an actual full loaf of bread, and it looked like a loaf of bread. It looked kind of flat. I don't know how, like, if they discovered yeast and what it does, and it, but it was cool to see like an actual loaf of bread from such a long time ago.
I'm such a bad baker that I bet you if I made a loaf of bread, it would be here 500 years from now.
And it would look the same.
I'm
a bad baker too. I'm a pretty good cook, but I'm not a good baker. I'm not good at being precise with cooking and baking. I like to throw different things in and try different things. And you can't really do that with baking.
Can't do that. Baking is very scientific.
Yeah.
Ugh.
All right. Well, we'll leave that.
Thank goodness we have people like Sophia.
Yeah, exactly. All right.
Enjoy.
Bye.
Welcome to another episode of A Bulldog's Passion. We're here with
Sophia,
and we're learning about the history of baking. So, how did the history of baking become your passion?
Well, I've been baking since I was 5, and my mom was a really big inspiration for me.
That's amazing. So, she inspired you?
Yeah.
That's amazing.
Did she bake a lot with you?
Oh yeah, all the time.
What did you like to bake? Did you do like dessert or just like random?
It doesn't really matter to me. I like cooking and baking.
Mm-hmm. So you kind of like both?
Yeah.
Okay, that's great. Let me just remind you to invite me over when you make something.
Okay.
Because it's probably delicious. So when you were researching, what was like strange or oldest kind of food that you researched?
Well, I found that the oldest food that is still being made today is a sort of pudding.
Pudding?
Yeah.
Wow, I would thought it would be like a bread, but I guess it's pudding. I guess that's probably easier to make.
I guess so.
Yeah, maybe the ingredients were probably easier found. So what was the weirdest food that you researched?
Well, I found this. It was like almost like a cake, but it had fish heads in it. And it was called fish head cake.
Fish head cake.
But in the middle, you can just see a giant fish head. In the middle, you can just see a giant fish head.
I don't think I'm going to eat that.
Yeah, I'll pass on that. I'll pass, but if you want to just make normal chocolate cake, I'll eat that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like, what kind of, like, food did you research? Did you research, like, baking, like, desserts, or just, like, dinner, or...
I researched basically how the food was created, not so on the food. Like, I researched who first started baking, and that was the Egyptians.
And Egyptians? Wow.
Yeah.
So, wow. Do you know, like, who else started, like, who started baking after the Egyptians?
It was the Greeks. And actually, how you say cake in Greek is actually pronounced kaka.
Kaka? Sounds like a chicken.
Yeah.
Or a bird. But kaka.
Yeah.
I like kaka a lot. Do you know, like, who created, like, dessert?
Well, it's the Greeks and the Egyptians, basically. The Egyptians didn't make the yeast, the Greeks did, and the first actual cakes were made with yeast. So it was almost like a sweet bread.
Oh, yeah, sweet bread.
So cakes were a sweet bread, and yeast, what does yeast do? What does yeast do for the cakes?
It makes it, well, for bread.
For bread. Oh, that's right, for bread. You can tell I don't bake.
It makes it puff up, because when you normally go to make bread, it's very flat, and it's just a really almost like rubbery dough.
Okay.
But then when you put it in the oven, it rises and rises and rises, and that's what the yeast does.
Oh.
I thought it was only baking powder that did that, but I didn't know yeast did it too.
No wonder why when I try to make bread, it doesn't make bread.
You don't put yeast in
it? No.
Well, I guess you need to go out and buy some yeast.
Yeah.
Maybe. Or Sophia can just make me bread. That would be easier.
A lot easier. What was like another like fact or anything that you learned when you were researching?
Well, I learned that yeast was also created in 500 BC.
Wow. That's a very long time ago.
And the first cake, I actually remembered all the ingredients. It was yeast, flour, honey, shortening, sugar, milk, and baking powder.
Wow.
Wow.
They had.
I wonder if we could make that now.
Salt.
Yeah.
And salt. That sounds like a basic cake that we could make now.
I know.
It doesn't sound very sweet though.
Yeah, that's all. It was only like they didn't really have squeeze bottles yet.
Right. Yeah.
But it was like only like a spoonful of honey.
Of
it wasn't
honey.
And
oh wow.
The sugar didn't do much either.
No. Wow.
Well, if it was in BC a long, long time ago, then I guess it was probably like better than we could have done, probably.
Yeah, probably.
Like now.
Now, would the average person living at that time be able to make the cake and would be able to have all the ingredients, or was it mostly for like kings and things like that?
Well, you could get it, but you probably would have to work a lot, and it would probably cost you almost. So $100 to us is not that big of a deal, but it would probably cost you $100 for all those ingredients back then, and that was like a lot of money.
A lot of money.
Yeah.
So if you had $100 million, or $100,000, let's make it a little bit more realistic, $100,000 to spend on baking or cooking or learning more about the history of baking, what would you do with that money?
I would probably travel around the world and see how in different countries what they bake and how they bake it.
Oh, that's awesome. That would be a great experience, and you're learning hands-on.
Yeah.
Instead of just reading recipes in a book.
Yeah, that's amazing. I think that's a great way to spend so much money.
Can I go with you?
Sure.
Yeah, I want to come. I want to taste so many different foods. There's so many different foods that I haven't tried yet.
Yeah, so Olivia and I are going with you.
Okay.
If you get the $100,000, Olivia and I are going with you, okay?
Sure.
All right.
Get enough for 3 people.
Okay. First class.
Yeah.
Sounds good to me. Is
Sounds
there any other way
amazing.
to travel? You were shocked by the fact that you found out that cooking was in BC, happened that long ago.
Yeah.
What else were you shocked to find out?
I was also shocked to find out that the first oven was a hot rock.
Oh.
A hot rock.
I'm surprised that they even have an oven. They didn't just put it out in the sun.
And bake it in the sun.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But a hot rock, that was really...
And if you think about it, at the time, it was probably, so advanced
Yeah.
that
Like, oh my gosh, I can cook.
I can cook on a hot rock, yeah. And now we think about it and we're like, oh, geez.
Ew.
Yeah.
Disgusting.
I don't want my bread cooked on a rock.
Yeah, and they probably didn't have pans either, so they probably just put it on the rock.
Right on the rock. You're right. You're right.
And like, who knows what happened to that rock?
Yeah. Yeah.
A dinosaur could have stepped on it and you're using
Exactly.
it to eat your food.
Yeah.
The first plates were leaves,
Oh.
kind of. They kind of like molded together some leaves.
Oh,
And that was a
they kind
plate.
of wove them together to
Yeah.
make a plate.
Yeah. I know like people like back in history like to weave things, but I didn't know they used it for plates.
Yeah,
very
it was
interesting.
that was another fact.
Those are some amazing facts that you learned
I know.
about baking
I
and
know.
about the history of it. Because we don't really think about the history of where our
Yeah.
food comes from.
Yeah.
We just assume, here's our food.
Yeah.
We don't think about how it came to be.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's why it's a great topic that you came up with, because we're learning so much.
I know. I didn't know they used hot rocks. Like I would have never thought of that. Like
No.
hot rocks? No.
And
no.
I also think it's amazing because how did they take a hot rock and make it a microwave or an oven?
Exactly. Like how does that hot rock progress to what we have now?
Yeah.
That would be interesting to study as well, as to see the progression of how we got that far.
In the 1900s, they started using electricity a little bit,
Okay.
and they kept getting it more and more and more. So in the 1900s, they didn't have an oven yet, but they used a little bit of electricity
Okay. They used the electricity
Yeah.
to
warm the food.
To warm the food.
It wasn't like burning hot when it came out, but it was still like warm. Not like today when you can use a microwave and you can put it in.
And you burn yourself when
and
it
you
comes
burn
out.
yourself.
Yeah.
Yeah. I guess we would say even though like it's not the best, it's a little safer because it's harder to burn yourself.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's gotten much safer. Cooking has gotten much safer.
So, was there any other facts you didn't get to tell us?
Anything you found, anything that you didn't like that you learned.
I did not like this. So,
Tell us more.
when I was researching, I was actually researching at night, and that's when I found the egg cake fact. The
fish cake.
egg, the
fish
fish
egg
cake fact. And I went to sleep that night, and I had a dream about my mom made me fish cake.
Ooh.
So that was my dream.
Did you like the fish cake in your dream?
No, I did not. I woke up and I had to get water.
Oh.
It's not good.
Yeah.
So so learning that affected your sleep at night.
Yes, it did.
The fish cake ruined your night.
It did.
I think it would ruin anyone's night.
I know. If my mom came up to me and be like, "Hey, I made this. Try some fish cake," and I'd be like, "No, thank you.
No, thank
No,
you.
thank you. No.
I'll pass."
I'll pass.
So, was there anything else you didn't like or anything you didn't get to tell us?
No, I think that's it.
That's awesome.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you so much for coming. We learned so much and had such a great time. But I will blame you if I have a fish cake dream.
Okay. I'm sorry.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.
Hi, Bulldogs. Welcome to another introduction.